Greetings and hello. While racism leads to more violence and attacks against a particular race, they are targeted at the men of that race. Racism is a subset of misandry, which discriminates and attacks men. In the case of racism, it targets any race of men and intentionally vilifies them based on their skin color. The women are almost never vilified as they are not on the receiving end of violence. Women of those races still have female privilege because it is still a man versus women issue. The sex factor involved is always overlooked. This is due to gynocentric panderers heading the anti-racism movements. On top of everything comes pandering to women, even if it means delegitimizing the issue. Women always want to hijack men's issues and take it for themselves to derail and run into the ground. This is all part of their social dominance instinct to keep themselves privileged and pandered. The women taking precedence in the race issue is just another facet of female privilege. The women have all the power due to gynocentrism, so they take over any movement, which includes anti-racism. It is all about keeping women privileged no matter if the men of that race have to suffer even more. Just like with other issues, it is framed as women having it worse. This is an insult to males, which racism primarily targets. The lack of men being addressed is because women want it to be so, and thus, gynocentric men, in pandering to them, follow in their footsteps and exaggerate women's struggles, while at the same time ignoring men's. Such rhetoric is on purpose to deflect from giving men protection and rights. Feminists do this because they know that any pro-male movement that emerges will expel them, so they want to squash any resistance early. They do this by subverting the movement to focus on so-called women's issues and make it about women. Since racism is misandry targeted primarily at men that look different than the prevailing expectation, it is a men's issue. Men are the ones who are targeted by discrimination, abuse, physical assaults, and lynchings. Just like with any other issue, men are always the ones who bear the brunt of abuse and have the raw deal. This is because of people's innate gynocentric bias and favoring toward women. So, any talk about women being on the primary end of racism is just derailment meant to uphold that gynocentric bias. This is akin to how feminists took over the anti-bullying and the anti-domestic abuse movements. Men have legitimate issues they bring up, but feminists minimize them and invade with their lies. They start out by gynocentric men letting them into the movement and pandering to them. Because of women's social dominance instinct to take over everything, they will use the movement and usurp it to attack the men who started it. Afterward, when they have this control, they will drive it into the ground, and at best what remains of the movement becomes controlled opposition, but usually it becomes another base of operations that feminists use to further strip men of their rights. Gynocentrism rules everything in society, including the vast majority of men who start these movements. They fail to keep man-haters out and gladly hand over their movements to them. This is how derailment starts in the first place, as men pander to women. If men really want to improve their situation, they have to address the fact that women do not have their best interests in mind and want them to stay in their situation. This is all to women's benefit because they benefit off of men being the scapegoats while receiving privileges. The cope that this sorts itself out, just like quote "go woke go broke," is a lie meant to keep men complacent. It could be further said that lies like this started through a gynocentric lens to keep men passive and not fight back against feminist threats. It is a psyop that invades male spaces as cope disguised under what these men interpret as a pro-male message. Even though it is straight from their enemies and a complete lie, it sounds good, plus these men do not have to do anything, so all the better to them. It is what makes such attempts at deflection of men's issues dangerous. The more men accept cope like this, the more men get harmed. Again, this is because of feminist attacks and subversions that trad cons agree with. Since they operate on the scale of pandering to women, it is just normal territory for them. So they set their minds with this cope of things sorting themselves out naturally, as a way to avoid the real issue. The issue at play is misandry, and these men do not want to hear it, because they are too obsessed with gaining status and the girl, both of which come in direct conflict with fighting for the rights of men. For the issue of racism, the same thing happens. The gynocentric men's first primary goal is to pander and give everything they have, including the movements they built up, to the women. The women then repeat the cycle of invade and trash, just like the zillions of movements before that. The men then rationalize this, with gynocentrism being at the forefront, with the thought that, quote, since women's issues are being addressed, then they will address our issues because they are so altruistic. The lie that women are the benevolent gender comes greatly into play here. While men take the abuse, but to these men, as long as they have hope, everything is well and good. A second factor in the racism equation itself is that it does not originate from men. Racism originates from women to demonize a particular outgroup of men. This adds a scapegoat for female behavior and puts gynocentric men's attention to focus on fulfilling their women's wishes. Women get the ick from men who are not attractive to them and thus make up excuses to demonize them. This is where the gynocentric men become attack dogs to attack their fellow man at a woman's wish. It's just how women demonize homosexual and or bisexual men. They are disgusted by them because they do not serve them. Racism is the same way as women find oppressed men, thus low-status men, to be repulsive and demonize them. It has always been this way and is one of the reasons involved when war or conflict starts. The women of one nation want to exert their social dominance to take over a group of men, with an outgroup being an easier target, and go down to business. This issue of race is again one of men against women. Women instigate racism towards an outgroup of low-status men, and gynocentric men follow to demonize as they are afraid of being deselected. Even inside these anti-racism movements, the women take over the movement to shut down any talk of positive progress for men's issues, with the benefit of getting more privilege for themselves. So any deflection from men's issues, no matter how subtle, is always an attack on the male sex by women. The goal is to have men fully subjected like slaves, so for any progress to happen in movements supposed to support men like anti-racism, men have to recognize the real issue and kick out the feminists.